22, he was treated again. What do you mean? He normally carried a quiet, oppressive pressure just by being there, but Shiro Korbas, director of the Royal Medical Bureau, repeated his words anyway, trembling inwardly. I mean, regarding Kondo's treatment, it has been entrusted entirely to a certain person, so I am unable to heal him. When a subordinate told him that the Chancellor himself had brought in Saikaira, unconscious and clearly beaten, Shiro had nearly spat out the coffee he'd been drinking. Not just because Saikaira was covered in wounds, but because Camel had personally carried him here. He immediately had Saikaira taken to the treatment room in the back, and then, remembering Saikaira's unusual condition, Shiro clutched his head. You are the director of the medical bureau, the finest physician and healer in this country. And you're saying you can't treat him. What does that mean? It wasn't that Shiro lacked the technical skill. He would stake his pride on that. But he couldn't heal him. No, he mustn't. I've already sent someone to summon the appropriate person, so. He tried desperately to dodge, but the more he spoke, the more suspicious he sounded even to himself. Yet Saikaira's peculiarity ultimately tied into his relationship with that person. Shiro, who had no desire to have his head and torso separated after speaking out of turn, could only keep evasively parrying Camel's questioning. I had heard that some people dislike him, since he's an otherworlder who isn't the Saintess. Huh, that's how you're taking it. It was true that there were people who spoke ill of Saikaira, an ordinary man with no powers, unlike the Saintess. From their perspective, an uninvited civilian had been dragged along, and it irritated them that the kingdom had to support him with public funds. But Shiro didn't feel that way at all. He'd thought, what terrible luck, about an ordinary person caught up in it, and when he met Saikaira in person, he found him likable. Strange, yes, but likable. If anything, after seeing the ice-cold Third Knight Commander Aresh interact that intimately with someone, it was hard to imagine anyone daring to direct hostility at Saikaira. Still, in this situation, it wasn't unreasonable for Camel to interpret it that way. And the one drawing that conclusion was the Chancellor, the pinnacle of political power. Shiro might have been a bureau chief, but Camel was above even that. But if Shiro treated Saikaira here, then he'd end up angering the highest authority in the military instead. In the end, all Shiro could do was buy time. If you truly refuse to treat him, then I will provide a healer myself. That would. That was bad. If someone used healing magic to repair injuries of this severity, Saikaira would immediately suffer mana intoxication. And if a healer who didn't understand that treated him all at once, the next danger would come from there. And besides, the act of making mana settle also consumed mana. In a situation where every second mattered, there was no guarantee that healer would react properly on the spot. It was possible to make mana settle using someone else's mana, but you'd have to overwrite the caster's mana imprint first, consuming enormous time and mana. Shiro's resistance was futile. A secretary, acting on Camel's orders, reached for the door to leave the treatment room, and the door was flung open violently. Aresh! At the arrival of the person he'd been waiting for, Shiro nearly burst into tears with relief. But the one who had arrived had discarded his usual blank expression entirely. His eyes burned with emotion that threatened to spill over. Commander Indrak? Camel, too, had heard that Aresh was acquainted with Saikaira, but he had never seen Aresh look so panicked. For once, he widened his eyes as he spoke the man's name. Aresh ignored them both. He walked straight to Saikaira, who lay on the bed, his bruises cooled only by towels, treated with nothing more than first aid. Saikaira, whom Aresh had parted from just yesterday, still had shadows under his eyes. But now his face and body were marked with bruises, and perhaps from the injuries he even seemed feverish, breathing raggedly. Aresh gently brushed the damp bangs back and checked his temperature. I'm going to treat him. Leave. At Aresh's sudden command, Camel frowned in displeasure, but Shiro hurriedly stepped in. My apologies, Chancellor. Kondo's treatment has been entrusted to Aresh, so. Even so, why do I need to leave? IT will take time, and the Chancellor is surely busy. There's no need for you to wait. Aresh, will half a koku 1 hour be enough? 1 koku. 2 hours. Understood. Aresh answered instantly. Something prickled in Shiro's chest at that, but he obediently did as instructed, pushing the reluctant Chancellor out and leaving the room. It hurt, but more than that, it was suffocating. He'd been punched and kicked by strong men. In Saikaira's life, being subjected to that kind of violence from adult men had been a first. And his attackers were knights, If you translated it into his world, they were soldiers. Try getting beaten by trained soldiers. Saikaira, already frail to begin with, had been unable to move after a single blow. Seeing that, the men with the grand title of knight mocked him and kept going. It wasn't even about pain anymore. Breath crushed in his chest, he endured with everything he had. They were venting their frustrations and issuing a warning. They didn't intend to kill him, so if he could just endure until time passed, he'd survive. But there was also the chance they simply didn't understand how fragile he was, so he did everything he could to protect his vitals and hold on. Eventually, as his consciousness began to blur, "If you've learned your lesson, know your place." They spat the parting words and left. "Ah, this is bad. If I'm left like this, I might die." That was his last thought before his awareness cut out. The next thing he felt was a familiar warmth. And then also familiar, the sensation of lips. Hard fingers pried his mouth open, and something soft, slick with moisture slid inside. At the same time, he felt the feverish haze ease. The fog in his head slowly cleared, and sensation reached all the way into his brain. A warm hand traced along his side, and the dull pain began to subside. As the pain and suffocation faded, heat and pleasure surged upward. Indrak, night calm man. When he finally managed to open his eyes a sliver, the person there was exactly who he'd imagined. Hovering over him, skin pressed to skin, wearing that familiar displeased expression. "How do you feel?" A lot better. The lingering floatiness was probably mana intoxication from the healing magic. Most likely, the injuries had been severe, so Aresh had healed him while simultaneously settling the mana so it wouldn't break off midway from the intoxication. The pain was gone, so now they would move into properly treating the mana intoxication. A wet sound rising from below reached even Saikaira's ears. "It'll take a little time." "Yes, sorry, as always." Aresh looked down at him after that apology, his expression unreadable. Then he layered his body over Saikaira's again.